What's going on, everybody? Happy Wednesday, Mr. Oliver. What's going on to you, good sir? How are you? You are classically muted anyway. Kept yourself quiet there. I love it. I love live TV.
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah. I am great. I am back. I was on a 2-week road show the last couple of weeks. 1 week I was unable to attend because of severe internet issues in a hotel where I was staying at. And so I am excited. I am back. It was very cool. Partly it was great to be out and about again and to be meeting with people and going to events and speaking at events. It was also interesting because 3 out of the 4 cities I was at was I've never been there before. So Kansas City, Memphis, Austin, and it was really good. A lot of good gems, a lot of good value to help with topics we can talk about too.
Good. Well, I'm already jealous because everywhere you went to, I've never been to myself.
All right. Well, the next roadshow, you're definitely invited. You just got to make your way here to the States.
On my way. I'll book a ticket right now. So anyway, we got a lot to catch up on, a lot to talk about. We're going into episode 3 of onboarding and training and picking up from where we left off. We got lots of gems to drop today, haven't we?
Yes, we do. I am excited to pick up that conversation here, episode 8. For anybody watching, listening, please make sure to say hi in the chat. Tell us where you're coming from. Post a comment, ask a question. We're going to be talking about training, but if you got anything call center related, throw it in there. It's always fun for us to be on a plan, have a goal of what we want to talk about, and then completely get derailed from that and be in the moment on live TV, if you will. So it's always fun for us. We're good that way.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the way it works, and that's why, as we've said from day one, which we still haven't done yet, which we will get to putting previous episodes live on a podcast. We will get there, I promise you. It's going to be unedited. That's the best part about this. So many people edit their cuts and things like that. I don't want to waste time editing. Let's just get that out there. Let's, if we mess it up, if we don't go live, screw it.
Yep, exactly. And I get that comment a lot from guests who come on my podcast that I have, the Authentic Persuasion Show. And they're like, is it going to be edited? What do you do? I'm like, well, it's called the Authentic Persuasion Show. It'd be weird if it was really edited and scripted. So no, we'll just see what happens, right?
No, exactly. So where are we going to kick off today? What are we going to pick up with?
Let's just dive into the world of training and where an LMS, where testing, where some standardization, depending on where we get to, we might talk about standardizing and calibrating the trainers and how you keep that in check so that you can build a scalable operation, which is the key, right, for me. And let you take over here in a moment, but the key for scalable is having people do what they do best, but also removing as much of the human element and relying on people to be at their best all the time or to even show up. And how do you interchange people in a system and then have the system still work? So let's talk about that relative to LMS and start with that and your experience, your thoughts and ideas regarding LMS.
Do you know what? There's so many. I don't want to rattle on forever. I've been very fortunate enough to work with a lot of platforms in my tenure of working with in-house companies, implementation for all the way through to working as an external consultant to go in there and kind of help onboard, maintain that knowledge, maintain the content, maintain the platform use. But for me, I think where it really drives home is you've got to make sure that your platform is fit for purpose for your business. Because what's right for one person is not going to be right for somebody else. And I think from my perspective, I used to be very pro one system. And no matter where I went, I wanted to kind of put X in there and X in there. But it doesn't always work. I don't know if you have any agreements or disagreements with that, but I think from my perspective, it's make sure what's right for you, the features that are right for you, you have.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think one of the biggest challenge is that there's now a lot of options when it comes to an LMS, right? So there's lots of platforms. There's lots of tools you can buy, like go into the hardware store. There's lots of tools you can buy off the shelf. The question is, which is the right tool, and what are you going to do with it? And I think that's the biggest thing for the first part for anybody who's running or leading the training of an organization is, what's the goal of your training? What are you wanting to accomplish? And then picking the tool. A lot of people, I find, buy the shiny tool first and then realize maybe it's not the right tool, or they don't know how to use it, right? Like you walk into a store and here's this very cool power tool that you could buy, and then you take it home because you were all excited to buy it, or you got talked into it by the salesperson, and then you're like, wait, I don't even want this or know how to use it.
Yeah, and you're right, because there are so many features, there are so many advantages, there are so many benefits to all of these different platforms. It's, what is the shiny penny that you need? A prime example, I worked with a company a few years back, and they had a platform that served its purpose, because for them, they didn't really know how to use it. It was mainly going to be used as a content loading tool, so people could refer back to it rather than an LMS. And the cost was the right price for what the business wanted to pay. When I was hired to go in there, review it, and get it working, the problem I had was that it didn't have the functionality that in my head a company needed as a foundation to serve as an LMS for what they wanted. And I think the hardest part in there was, look, it's great for this, but you want this. I don't think you did this investigation when you had the opportunity at the time. But then it was too late to change. They were stuck in a 1, 2, 3 year contract. So we kind of had to make the best of a bad situation. But at that point, any LMS provider that's watching out there is probably going to either scream at me because they don't have this functionality, or they're going to scream at me because we're calling it out. But when the cost for custom work comes into play, that's the line that nobody likes to hear. Nobody likes to hear on the platform.
No, and especially not in that scenario that you're talking about. And just to clarify, correct me if I've, let me know if I've got this correct. In that scenario that you're talking about, which is a great example for anyone watching this and you're thinking about getting into it, or maybe you're in this scenario, is what I hear you mentioning is somebody bought a platform that was more of a knowledge base, a housing unit for their content, for the employees to reference. So they wanted to find an article, they wanted to watch a video, they needed to find some information, some kind of training maybe, and it was housed in more of a knowledge base than an LMS. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. I think what happened with the system, it turned into more of a knowledge base because of the way they used it, because they didn't have somebody in there with the experience to build it. What happened was they wanted the LMS features to be up and running, but I think they bought the most basic version of it. They couldn't do all singing, all dancing, fancy stuff that they wanted. A lot of LMS platforms nowadays have all the functionality you need, but the ones that are at the cheaper end of the scale will then charge you once you're logged. It's like when you go to these companies and you want the basic model, but then they want to charge you for X, Y, Z, and everything else that goes on top of it. Whereas actually, it probably would have benefited you to buy Model A, which already had that, which was slightly pricier at implementation, but is now going to cost you less in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that's a key distinction, because at one end of the scale, you could end up with something that's a knowledge base, which there's nothing wrong with a knowledge base. That is good and important to house the information. But if you need more of an LMS, that's why I mentioned earlier, the key is to know what you're looking for, what problem you're trying to solve in your organization, why you want it, where that fits in before you go shopping. Or, and I'll say it again, before you get talked into something by a salesperson who says, yeah, sign up for this and sign up for this contract, and maybe you needed something more. Or what I see a lot too happens is, because people are always concerned about salespeople, selling them software, selling them platforms, the salesperson might even advise them on the proper package, right? That package A, which is the higher one with some of the bells and whistles that they actually need. And the company says, oh, you're just trying to sell me this, so I'm not going to sign up for that. Let me start with the basic. And they undersell themselves instead of trusting. But usually they don't know what they're looking for. So let me ask you this. And Al, great to see you pop in here with the comment. Good to see you as always. And his comment is, some business models do not need all the bells and whistles. Again, that's why it's so important. And I love that comment about, you know, knowing why you need it and what you need it and what the options for easily upgrading. But let me ask you this, Oliver, we're talking about LMS, learning management system, learning management software, you know, acronyms, which are always fun. But what are some of the parts of an LMS? What would make an LMS versus a knowledge base in your experience?
Do you know what? I think the answer is kind of in the question from my perspective, and I think you hit the nail on the head. What is the difference? The knowledge base is, you know, the holder of the knowledge of the information. If you get asked a question on the spot, if you get asked a question once you're live within your environment or you're live within a call center, you go to your knowledge base to find out the answer. It's like your Google, it's your wiki. That's exactly what that is. It's quick reference. It's go in there. It's keyword search. Job done. That's your knowledge base, in my opinion. The learning management system is helping you to remember that information for future reference. So, for example, if you've got a great functionality or a great connection between your LMS and your KB or your knowledge base, you know, it detects the searches that you're doing. So that sends that back to your training team. So effectively, if they've got 1,000 people searching for how to do this or that specific keyword, that your training team can then go away, create a piece of content specifically around that, and then they can train that out. And that's where your links and your synergy and your interconnection comes from, linking both of those systems or having your training team manage both your knowledge base and your LMS. Answering your question, though, and going back to it, the key differences from an LMS from a functionality standpoint, there are so many. And as Al said a minute ago, you know, you don't need all the bells and whistles. You need what's right for you. And from my perspective, at least minimum from an LMS is you should be able to enroll adequate cohorts of people, being able to track, audit, and report on all of your staff. And in most cases, everybody likes to remove manual elements. And what I would always say is if you can automate your reports and have them sent out to your call center managers, your call center directors, so that you don't even have to worry about it. And the fact is, if they see messages or emails coming from your training team at that point, that they turn around and say, well, how do I know if this person's done this quiz or this person's done this material? Is if that manager has already got those reports, you know, I'm going to use a phrase a friend of mine is, you know, put the monkey on somebody else's shoulder, automate it, and then it's their responsibility. You haven't got to go and chase the training team. The training team don't have to send the reports or think about sending reports. So automation is key. And giving, and a lot of companies don't like to do this, giving managers access to the reporting tool. And there are two platforms that I can think of off the top of my head, if you want to speak to me separately about it, that do that give you a management portal that looks at everybody underneath you. That's exactly what you need from any company perspective, in my opinion. What about you? What do you think?
I love that. And I put it on the screen for anyone listening or watching the replay, your email. So there's Oliver at thecatalyst with 2Ts.com if people want to reach out to you. Mine is Jason at cutterconsultinggroup.com. Just if you're listening to this and you're like, wait a second, I want to reach out to these guys and chat with them. Email both of us, email whichever one you like better. Either way, it works for me. So for me, I think, you know, the LMS, as you're describing it, the analogy and what I'm thinking about is that
sorry.
We're both laughing at somebody's chat they put in on LinkedIn, and so here's the thing, and here's the analogy I was thinking about: an LMS platform, learning management software system, in what it allows you to do, like what you were talking about with the reporting, with the automation, with the housing of the training materials, is to me the difference between your salespeople having all of their leads written down on a yellow tablet on their desk, and then you as a manager having to go up to each person to ask them how they're doing on their leads and find out what's going on, versus using a CRM and being able to pull reports, have oversight, have everything in one place, and have that visibility. It's the same thing. There's so many organizations where the trainer has maybe some slides on their computer. They stand up there and do the training all day, and there's no oversight, there's no testing, there's no standardization. You literally have no idea what's going on from a management perspective unless you sit in that training environment and listen or observe or talk to people. And so the LMS is basically filling in all of those gaps such that, like you said, management can log in or get a report and know how the students are doing, how the trainer is doing relative to the metrics.
Yeah, and you're so right. And I'm just going to highlight, because I don't want it to be an in-joke. Richard has made a comment. If you're on LinkedIn, you'll be able to see it. We're obviously not preferring or naming any systems from our perspective because we don't partner with anybody or we're not sponsored by anybody. But if you want to check out the LinkedIn comments from Richard, you can do it. And Richard, no, you are not going to get blacklisted. I promise you, for mentioning a brand. You guys can talk about brands all day long till the cows come home. I promise you. But yes, I mean, if you have a preference for automation or whatever it might be, then that's great. But like I say, automation is great. Automation is there, and it removes the manual element. It removes human error. I can't tell you how many times I used to pull reports from LMS systems and then convert it into an Excel spreadsheet and then add conversion rates, completion rates, non-completion rates, you name it. And at that point, it just becomes a mess. I remember there was one particular time where I ran a competition on an LMS platform, and it was a Christmas competition. And it was to generate interest in the platform, generate interest in the content, make sure people are having fun whilst they're learning. And for anybody out there, it's a great idea. We called it the 12 Days of Christmas, and we did 12 different product pieces on the build up to Christmas, and we incentivized every single one. And don't get me wrong, you shouldn't always incentivize people learning more, but it was just a bit of fun around Christmas.
Sure.
And it got to the point where I got that deep into the detail from the reporting that it just became over complicated. And I was sending out completion rates versus yesterday, and then I would go back on look at day 2, and then I would then up the conversion from day 1 into day 2 to show how many more people did it within that 24-hour window. And then I did it 72 hours, 96 hours, and it became a mess. So again, key metrics. Look at what you're using. Don't overly compensate for what you're trying to do. And just make sure that you're marking the right elements that are important to you as a company. A great comment there from Al. He uses the LMS to help evaluate his training team's performance and content relevance. 2 very important topics there. Don't you agree?
Yes, for sure. And I think on that reporting, one of the biggest mistakes that I have seen is being a part of an organization where we signed up for an LMS, got it set up and moving forward, and realized it wasn't native or integrated with our CRM or our HRIS, our human resources platform, which meant that no matter what was happening in those other systems, the LMS was standalone, which meant the reporting was standalone. And then it was very difficult and painful, like what you're talking about. You had to export, you had to manually do things. So when you're selecting it, my biggest tip that I tell people is just make sure that you're picking something that's going to natively integrate or be a part of the platforms you're already using so that the data is there, right? Because what you want to be able to do is correlate also like performance. So how are people doing on, let's say, closing deals relative to how they did in training, and not have to do too much of that manually. So I think that's one big thing. And then also, no matter what platform I've used, even CRMs, I have rarely found any platform where you can get all the metrics and all the analytics that you want without exporting it into a spreadsheet and doing some things. So I think there's always, you're always going to, if you really want to get into the details, you're always going to need to do that kind of analysis. And at the same time, you want to pick a platform that makes it so you don't have to do that all the time, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. And I think the more the integration, the better. And the reason why I say that, straight off the back of what you said, Jason, is because you look at in an ideal world, you just said it, your sales conversion, your learning conversion, your knowledge base kind of actions, If you can put all of those into one report into your HR system, you have got so much power and knowledge over the people that are working for you or working with you to then look at the kind of numbers in correlation with each other to say, well, hang on a minute, Jason's actually not closing deals, as you said a minute ago. He's only accessed the knowledge base once in the last month. And do you know what? He's only completed 2 out of the 10 courses that we sent him over the last 2 months. So, well, actual fact, you know, why hasn't he done that? Because if he does that, it will have a kind of a negative or a positive response in the HR system. I'm kind of babbling now because I'm confusing myself. But the point is, if you can link it and you can pull those reports, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. So let's address this, because I think this is a great question. I'm curious what your thoughts are, and then I have some thoughts. So Patrick Lawton, thanks for popping in and posing this question, because I think this is so valuable, which is there a way to demonstrate ROI, return on investment, for an LMS system that would encourage investment in this area? So I'm imagining the fact that it's, you know, a company wants to decide, should they invest, should they spend the money? Stakeholders at the top don't think there's value in it, don't see the reason for it. How do you justify that return on investment?
I'm going to talk from experience on this one. And it was the very first time I implemented an LMS when I worked in-house for a company. LMSs were becoming the rage. They were becoming the go-to tool in a lot of contact centers because you could do a lot more with them at the time than any in-house trainer could do. And I went to the kind of head honchos, went to my bosses and my superiors, and I said, you know, could we look at one? And they basically turned around to me and said, you know, at the time, demonstrate the ROI, show that you can actually get a return on investment for what you are looking for. And then at the time, come back to me and then tell me why we need this system and the money that I'm either going to save or why it's a good investment. I went away, I sat down with my team and I sat down with a couple of the in-house teams and looked at this. And yes, there is a way to demonstrate the ROI. And the way that I did it at the time was looking at time spent from trainers, looking at reporting and content implementation at the time. Now, there are so many more things that you can invest in. There are so many more ways that you can kind of get people to do quizzes outside of work, and you're looking at them spending, you know, their own time in different platforms. But my kind of key focus, and I hope this answers your question, was looking at how much time trainers spent marking test results, how much time trainers spent putting together bespoke content and then training out to this group of people and then this group of people and then this group of people. Because then all of a sudden you condensed it, that goes out as an e-learning package as long as the content is right. And the 5, 6, 10 or 20 hours that trainer spent could have then spent time focusing on new hires, induction, blended training. And that's the way that I looked at it. I looked at our weekly training schedule, our bite-sized training that we used to roll out, and thought, how can we compress this so that we can focus in other areas? And that's exactly what we did. And we were able to roll out double the amount of training in half the time. And we saw the benefits from it, and we saw the return on investment. That's from my perspective anyway. What about yourself, Jason?
I love it. So looking at my experiences with training and LMS, and I've mentioned this many times, especially when we're talking about this training scenario, for me, the ROI to calculate in an LMS is what would higher retention of new hires lead to on the backs of having an organized training platform. So when I have looked at selling to leadership, right, a CEO, founder, why an LMS makes sense is to look at the numbers currently and look at, okay, so out of every 10 reps that you hire, so there's the recruiting costs, there's the onboarding costs, there's all those costs that go into bringing one person into an organization. You bring in 10 people, then out of those 10 people, how many make it 30 days? How many make it 60 days? How many make it 90 days? What is that attrition and what is that pull-through rate of people where they're still in the organization? And generally what I look at in that is the fact that, especially if there's multiple offices with multiple different trainers, it's even easier because then you look at trainer A and office A and trainer B and office B and so on, and look at their stats and then compare the fact that they're all different and there's ups and there's downs. And for me, the return on investment of an LMS is that standardization. Instead of it being about what Bob is training on the fly, what he feels is best, based on what he thinks is best, based on when he was a rep, instead it's putting it into a platform. And then it's testing both Bob, the trainer, it's testing the reps, it's putting together this accountability, which in my experience will then lead to better retention, right? So if recruiting is just doing the same thing, and we standardize the training, and we know that those results are there, then that return on investment is indicated by how many more, right? So instead of, let's say, after 90 days, you've got 6 out of 10 people, you end up with 8 out of 10, or even 7 out of 10, then there's your return on investment. And then the other part too is, what's that speed to competency? You mentioned that weeks and weeks ago, right? About that onboarding. What is the speed to competency? And how quickly can you look at that and look at all your stats and say, okay, right now we have somebody start today on day 1. How long until they're closing their first sale? How long till they're hitting quota that we want them to hit, right? And we look at the whole cohort. How long does that take? Well, if you could speed that up, what would that mean for a business perspective, from a revenue perspective and a momentum perspective? And again, that's the potential ROI of adding the LMS.
Yes, absolutely. And there's one company out there in particular that I'm working with at the minute, or been speaking to recently, and they have pretty much a tagline that doubles or kind of increases the speed to competency by 2-fold. Yes, you pay a little bit more for your platform, but from an induction perspective, that's some incredible results. And if you've got evidence of that, and if you've got proof of that, then that's great. Likewise, another platform that I've been speaking to recently, who do speech analytics, they do a kind of live integration speech analytics with their LMS, with their content learning. And it kind of prompts you and helps you throughout your learning and throughout your introduction to the company, especially when you're starting out. And they promise to increase your conversion rates between 20 and 50%. And if you're dealing with CX and you're dealing with that customer experience side of things, off an average handling time of 5 to 6 minutes, they're shaving 90 seconds off of that call. These are 2 incredible platforms out there. But look, if you're looking for the right fit for your business, do your research, understand what you want. As we say, there are a lot of systems that will give you a big bang for your buck, but you need to know what you want before you just go and buy anything.
Yep. Patrick, thanks for that question. That's a super fun topic. I love talking about that, because it is one of those things where you're selling anything. There's what's the return on investment. It's a little gray and weird because you're trying to forecast what that's going to be and hoping for your organization. But there's hopefully some good ways you can do that. And then Al put another comment in here. He put another comment about calculating ROI for companies, understanding their business. But here's one. He said, we're talking about the LMS, which if your operation spans several international regions, your LMS should also be specifically designed for each learning culture of those sites, and it's not a one size fits all. And I think that's really one of the things, and I know you deal with this way more than I do, where you want to have a platform and then you can standardize it, but then you can make it regionally. Like there's a part that's underlying that's the same with that slight customization, but at least you know that the company's message and training is the same. What do you see with that? Because you're dealing with way more international experience, kind of operations than even I do.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you've got that kind of extent, especially across the US with multi-site, because they've
done a little bit. Well, yeah, okay. different parts in different states in the US are like different countries for sure. California is different than Florida is different than other parts. So that's fair.
Yeah, but going internationally, going regionally, I think there's 2 ways to look at it. One, it's the platform and it's the system itself, and 2 is the content. To kind of put this question or this comment in a box in itself. First of all, let's look at the platform. Yes, platforms do need to be different to an extent based on culture. Not too much from the system side of things. But then that's why within certain LMS platforms, you have what they call multi-tenants, and you have different platforms within a platform. And then you can kind of either brand, white label, or whatever it is based on region or company. Specifically in the outsourcing world, having worked in the outsourcing world for many years, you have one LMS system within your outsourced company, but you may have 10 different clients. So what you do within that is you have 10 different tenants, and then each tenant is branded based on your clients, and then only those cohorts have access. That's the first way to look at it. If you're looking from a culture perspective in terms of the same content but delivered culturally, look, I think from my view is, having worked across a specific, and I'm going to use the Caribbean as an example here. Every country, every island, every region is very, very different. You cannot compare one island with another island. It doesn't work, and it's offensive. And the way that sometimes I've had to operate is I've either had to get the generic piece of content done, and although, yes, the message is 98% the same, I've then had my regional trainer edit that content specifically for the culture. But from a LMS perspective, it's probably been slightly less of an edit rather than a face-to-face or an in-house training. So when I've delivered training in Jamaica versus St. Lucia, my trainings had to be adapted culturally to each area. But again, not that much. It varies based on country to country, wherever you go. Whether it's South Africa, India, Philippines, Caribbean, South America. Yes, you will need to be culturally appropriate. But the content and the message will majoritively stay the same. It's just how you deliver it. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, if we go back to the old phrase.
And I like what you said too about, if we look at the Caribbean and the islands, they're all different, and it's offensive to treat them all the same or assume they're all the same or lump them all together. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting, because even if we look at, and I was joking about it, but also not joking, if we look at the United States and we look at that way, right? Like, to lump the states together, yes, as one country, but still, like, people are different, and people from various, let's say, red or blue regions or parts of the country get offended when they're lumped in together with the others. And you have to keep that in mind, both from a operational, from a team, from a training, and then also from a sales and a customer standpoint. And so it's, how do you leverage technology to, as my favorite phrase over the last couple of weeks that I'm really diving into, and always, is scale the unscalable. How do you scale something that's unscalable, like regional training, but using technology and a platform that makes it so you can scale that and then replicate it? And scaling is, you're going to get the same results over and over again. Again, it's not just because Bob's having a good day or Bob's having a bad day, but like, here's a platform that, supports that.
Yeah. No, I think you're right there. I think you're right. And then obviously touching on Al's final comment that I can see so far on the screen, ROI is fairly easy to demonstrate and quantify if your audience understands their business. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think there are so many ways to do it, but like I say, make sure you do it the right way, and you're tracking it. And I think that's the most important. And that boils back down to what an LMS is there for. It's for you to track everything. It's not only just a knowledge housing center of tests, quizzes, videos, PowerPoints, PDFs, whatever you want to stick in your LMS. It's being able to track the relevance of the material, the relevance of the content, and if it's a blended approach, to make sure your trainer is delivering the right content, so that when you go to your LMS to do your testing or anything like that, your tests are passed. And whether it was a first attempt, second attempt, third attempt, whatever it may be, it's metrics. It's all it boils down to. And remember, I keep saying it, if you can't I can't even speak. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Yeah, and I was going to throw in that business cliche because it's so correct, right? If what isn't measured isn't managed, and then I think long term, and this is a good tip for people if they're diving into an LMS for the first time or they have one and they haven't taken it to the next level, is that person who had to take that quiz 2, 3, 4 times, or if you do a final exam and it took them several times to pass, is to reverse engineer and dissect. Okay, what did that person do once they hit your floor? How did they do performance-wise, right? Did they do okay? Or did they fail and they're no longer with the organization because they just couldn't make it? Then what happens is over time, you learn to where those lines in the sand are that you need to draw, which is if it takes you 3 times to pass this quiz, we know it's not going to be a good fit, right? Or we need to change our materials because maybe it's our training. Maybe it's the trainer. Maybe it's the content. Which I know you advocate more than drawing the lines in the sand, which is, okay, so maybe it's us, maybe it's not you.
I think for me, and I want to speak to every trainer when I say this, every call center manager when I say this, assistant manager, or anybody who has teams underneath them that have gone through training. Don't just use an LMS or your trainer in that sense as a tick box exercise. Mm-hmm. Go into the data. Why is it that way? Why has it turned out that way? I can speak for a number of trainers that I know that I've not caught out, but I've asked the question to, and they've gone, okay, yeah, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should go back and check that. Is to say, well, hang on a minute. So this person did fail 3 times, as you said. Why did you put them on the phones? Why did you let them out of training? Oh, hang on a minute. This person had a strike in training for lateness, had a strike in training for attitude, had a strike in training for passing or failing tests of X, Y, and Z. But overall, you think they're good. Have you gone back and looked at why that happened in the first place? That's the point of tracking it. No. But why not? Yeah. Why are you not using the data that's in front of you to do something about it? Look, I can hold my hands up, and I always do, because I always think it's important to hold yourself accountable for things. I did that. I went there, I did that, and there was times when I was working in-house as a company. Yeah, do you know what? I may have let things slip. I may have let things slide. But then it's only working as a consultant and then being able to question these people that used to do my job or doing my job.
Yeah.
Right, well, are you doing that? Are you checking this? No. They just let it happen. So what's the point of reporting if you're not going to do anything about it? And we've all been there.
Yep. Well, and again, the theme that I see with what you're talking about is that a lot of times salespeople are moved into training roles. And so you also see that with salespeople is what are their numbers? What are their metrics? What do the reports show? How many salespeople, sales professionals know their numbers and their stats moment to moment, and they know what's going on and where they're winning or not? And how many of them are just playing a numbers game and hoping that as long as they keep stepping up to the plate, at some point it will work out? And that kind of attitude, if not managed well from above and led, will lead to that. So what I think would be great in our final, 15, 20 minutes we have today, wrapping up training, is talking about where we kind of teased last time, is standardizing trainers and that whole process. So let's see if we can wrap up this training topic today with that.
Yeah, 100%. Let's do that. So from your perspective, Jason, if you were to kind of look at 3 trainers, 4 trainers, 5 trainers, however many it is, what do you think are the most important things when it comes to calibrating them, delivering content, calibrating the way they deliver training? So it's not just the material. There's so many different aspects to put in that question. I'm not going to kind of label everything, but what do you think are the key measurables when you're trying to calibrate your trainers?
For me, it's results. I always am careful because when we were talking about testing just a minute ago and all these metrics, if not careful and you incentivize or calibrate incorrectly, then you're essentially going to have trainers who are teaching for the test and helping people pass tests, but not actually know what they're doing, right? It's kind of a challenge happening, at least in the US in public school, is there's so many standardized tests and teachers just teach to the test, teach the kids how to take the test or pass the test, but nobody's actually learning anything, right? Or learning anything useful for after school, right? They're learning weird math that like nobody's going to use, but they're teaching to the test. And so I think the biggest thing where I look at is, what are the results? What are the salespeople doing once they're done with training, once they hit the floor, once they leave that nesting period or whatever that looks like, and they're active salespeople? What are their performance? How are they doing in all areas, both closing effectiveness, their closing percentage, their cancel percentage? So is that in parameters, right? You don't want somebody who's closing really well, but producing a lot of garbage. How are they doing in compliance or QA? What kind of seeds is that trainer planting? Especially if I have several trainers in an organization, what is the result of their people within the time frame that's respectable to hold them accountable to? You can't say, okay, well, this person's been out of training for 3 months and this happens. Like, well, that's on the floor manager or the team lead or somebody else at that point. But looking at that and, both the test scores, but then also those results.
Okay. No, I think it's a great way of looking at it. And I think if I remember correctly, you said it best last week. It's like in some companies, great, you're a trainer. You referenced it to a teacher. I think it was a history teacher. And you just said, hey, you're a history teacher. You go and teach whatever you want to go and teach this shit. You just teach history. It's fine. Yeah. You need to have that curriculum and everything and that structure in place, because how do you manage your teachers? I can't speak today. I've not had enough coffee.
It's all right.
So then, okay. So let me kind of put this to you the way you're looking at it from your trainer's perspective. So we look at the results. We look at the metrics that were in place. We look at how we do that. Would you say that everything is based on the people they're training? Would you say it's based on the deliverables post-training and how they're doing? Like, you're measuring the speed to competency like a glide path. How far do you go to check back to your trainer in your thoughts?
So I think there's some really big challenges in that area. One is that most trainers are not picking who's getting hired, right? Most trainers, especially in an organization that's bigger, the trainer doesn't have time to also be the hiring manager or maybe even have a vote in who's being selected. So there's also that careful balance where recruiting, hiring manager, somebody is picking the people and that trainer is inheriting them, right? Like a coach for a team or that history teacher who they didn't get to pick the students, right? Or their players, they just got handed a team. Now, good luck, right? Hopefully it's not the Mighty Ducks or the Bad News Bears, but you just never know, right? Like sometimes that's what you get. So obviously there's got to be standardization also on the recruiting side, which is important. So that recruiting is held to some metrics that they can control, and then training is held to their metrics. And then I think really the post-training, during the training, it's easy. Here's the quizzes, here's the tests, here's the competencies that we're going to measure. After that, I think it really depends on the sales cycle, the speed and volume at which they're getting sales opportunities, right? Yes. So if they're jumping into a center that's on a dialer and they're doing 200-300 calls a day, 600 calls a day outbound on a dialer, really quickly it's going to work or not work. And then they're going to move away from the trainer's influence, right? If they're having only a few conversations, if it's much lower engaged, like activity level, then, it might be a few months that the trainer could be held responsible for it. But I think it's, especially in that first month after training, that they have some hand in that. And I think it depends on that nesting period. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I go back to one of my first outsourcers that I worked for. No LMS, nothing like that. No content management. Everything was done on a spreadsheet. And, we were tracked. We were lucky enough as a trainer in-house to have a hand in the selection process. Now, I won't say we didn't run it. The campaigns always, because it was an outsourcer, the campaigns always ran the interviews and they ran the assessment centers and everything else. But we would be in there to give our opinion and things like that, have lunch with the candidates so that we could kind of break the ice with them a little bit. Because we knew the type of people that our clients wanted to work on the phones. We would then fill out a spreadsheet and this was the best. This was the, oh god, but this spreadsheet used to give me nightmares. It would go on forever, but it was great because it was my first introduction to basic and kind of intermediate Excel training with pivot tables and everything else. The way we could track it. And it started off with CV, and then there was like a grade on CV, and then phone interview. Then there was a stage on group stages and one-on-ones. So we tracked every metric right from the very first introduction to this company by sending in your cover letter and your CV all the way through. Then in training, we had the training tracker that was put in there as well. Again, it all boiled down to a metric, and we had everything that went along. And then we passed that sheet over to our campaigns manager who was managing them, and their KPIs were in there on a glide path. So we tracked it for, I think it was a month, and we tracked that speed to competency that they had to do sales conversion, attendance, and whatever. And it was tracked like, I don't want to say daily, maybe weekly. And then at the end, everything kind of boiled back down. And on the front tab, we had our pivot table, which monitored everything through recruitment, training, induction, live, you name it. And we could go back to any stage in that first kind of 2 months of this life cycle of this employee, and we could see where they were doing well and where they weren't doing well. And for us as trainers, it was imperative that we had good scores and everything else. And it wasn't just about making sure that they filled out a happy sheet at the end of training to say, Oliver did well at training, Oliver was enthusiastic, Oliver was entertaining. It wasn't any of that. It was physical numbers that you can manage. Because you catch somebody on a bad day, they're just going to go, Oliver was boring. I didn't want to listen to him. And it was all achievable numbers. And I think that was so important. Nowadays, you get an LMS that can do that, or you input your data in that. There are still companies that track it by a spreadsheet. I think a lot of companies still use my spreadsheet that I created years ago to track this. But I think that's how you calibrate from day one all the way through to the end, from my perspective. And I think that still rings volumes when you're tracking day one to where you, as you said, where you want to cut off. I think that's important.
Yeah. Well, and the biggest takeaway from that I hear is to take it away from that subjective. Oliver is good. Oliver was nice. Oliver sounded good on the phone, to objective, number-based. Obviously there might be some subjectivity on there about the cover letter or the CV, right? The resume, but still it's boiling it down to a number that's then objective, and then some calculation. And I think that's always a challenge. I mean, in every organization is, how do you, where do you calibrate? How do you create the standard? How do you know what success looks like for a trainer? And then how do you hold them to that? I think it's again, just like anybody in any role in any company, is you have to be careful to only hold people accountable for what they can control, right? Yes. Again, to hold a trainer accountable for the, graduation rate or the number of sales that reps do after they graduate isn't always fair if you're not careful, because again, they're not picking, they're not recruiting. Yes, they're training. Yep. And then what's happening after they leave the nest. And so you have to be careful with that. And I love what Al said in his comment, is that he sets a standard, which I've done this before. I'm sure you've done this many, many times, is making that initial training, running that first one, implementing it, seeing how it goes, creating the content around that for the training, and then literally that becoming the standard. Now, I think the thing is to be careful of is, I know for myself, it's not fair, because I know what I'm really good at. It's not fair for me to hold everyone else to the standards and the bar that I might set every time, right? Like Al's saying in here, if my class success is at 100%, then they are challenged to maintain those standards, right? And it's great if you have employees who are as amazing as you. It doesn't always happen. So, where does it look? You want to achieve that 100%, or if you get 80% of your people to be rock star, like salespeople in their closing deals in the first, let's say, 2 weeks, that's great. But what's a normal human at scale going to be able to do week in and week out?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hey, look, my question back to Al on this before we kind of wrap up and end the day is, how do you know your class is 100% successful? What do you measure yourself on when you are setting the standards? Because that's the other thing you need to look at is, if you are the one setting the standards, are you setting the right standards that anybody else can achieve? And I know you and I disagree on this, and we have done, Jason. But I think that's great because we do have the ability to disagree with each other. Is when it comes to certain sales scripting and things like that. How do you know which sales script is 100% effective versus me saying, do you know what, I'm going to give you bullet points and reference points, and you make the script. What works, what doesn't work. And that's the thing is, but then can you blame your leads? Can you blame the person that you're speaking to? And we always know that age-old comment is, a bad workman blames his tools. And that's it. How do you set those standards? And I think you said it best, Eddie, is what does good look like? You've got to sit down, and that isn't just you. Even if you run the company, even if you own the business and everything else, I think it's important to get a number of people's perspectives on what you're delivering, and it's not just you. I've worked for people and I've worked for companies where it's been their way or the highway, and you know what? That doesn't always pan out.
Yeah, and I think I'll put another comment in there regarding the company standards of what they adhere to. I know in reading it and thinking about a class success could be if I had 10 people start a training class, and then they go through the classroom, and then they get on the phones, and then they're in that period, right? Some people call it a nesting period, where it's the trainer over their shoulder helping them close sales, and maybe the goal is 2 sales that first week or 5 sales that first week of the nesting period, or by the time they graduate, is that everyone achieves that, right? Here's a clear metric. You either got there or you didn't. And what does that look like? But then it gets into the messy stuff you're talking about, which is what about the leads? Sometimes, and I don't let people use this at scale, but what about seasonality, right? Like maybe this is a bad week. Maybe it was, calling on people in the summertime just makes it harder. It's not impossible, but maybe this was a rough week to be trying to close deals or whatever that looks like. And that's where it starts to get really messy. And of course, trainers will, in my experience, squirm as much as they can, if it's not them.
I got one final question for you, because I know time is running out very quickly, but it's relating.
We got all the time. We can just put more quarters in the machine. We got all the time we want. It's our live stream. Yeah.
Do you think it's important? And I want to ask our audience that are kind of paying attention, listening, if you're not listening, post, whatever it might be. Do you think it's important that the trainer can do the job of the person they're training and have the same results and the expectation of who they want to go and do that moving forward?
So that's a great question. Interestingly enough, Al mentioned that, or already responded his kind of thoughts with that. I completely think that a trainer should know and is professionally obligated to know how to do what they're asking others to do at a really solid level, right? Not a, here's what I know about sales. Now I'm going to train you on this. Now get on the phones and good luck. But a literally being able to sit down, which I have done many times as a trainer, sit down next to somebody, take the same phone calls and show them how it's done, or jump in and close deals. I think that has to be done. And I think one of the things I look for in a trainer is somebody who can do the job, right? Let's say selling the product, the service, and they can do it at a high level with the right expectation, meeting the right company standards, kind of like Al said, right? For compliance and QA, for cancellation, retention purposes, and they can do it at the level we want people to do it. I think one of the challenges, I see this a lot, where a trainer, when they were a rep, they could close, let's say, 2 sales where the requirement was 5, and so, but they don't know how to close 5. They don't know how to close 2, let's say, in a week. Does that make for a good trainer? Right? Do as I say, not as I do, or they don't know. They don't have the skills to be able to close that higher one. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a very mixed bag of emotions when it comes to something like this, because, I've been brought in as an external trainer to train a sales team. And one of the ways that I go in and work with clients or in-house is I want to know everything about everything. I want to know how the CRM works. I want to know how the dialer works. I want to, even if I'm going in as a senior manager I want to know how everything works. And I think I referred to that last week. As I went in, I got put through training. I wanted to take calls. I wanted to take the chat. I think everybody needs to know the product or be able to how to do it at a certain level. It gets to a point where you're that far removed that you don't need to, but you need to know the person's beneath you, how they do their job, and the person below that, because if anybody goes on vacation or holiday or whatever it might be, then there's that need to step in. But as a trainer, some of the best trainers I have worked with have worked their way up through the company, have been the best salesperson, the best CX person, the best persons to do this, that, and achieve this, and then have fell into training and found it that way because they know everything inside out. But I've also known trainers that have come in externally and have tried to train product without understanding or going through training themselves or without the results themselves. I mean, I used to get asked all the time as a sales trainer, what was your sales numbers like when you were on the floor? What was your sales numbers like when you were out in the field? And you know what? I could turn around and go, this is what I hit. This is what I delivered. This is where I did it. And this is how I did it. And I think having that gravitas to be able to turn around to your delegates and say, this is what I achieved, this is where I was at, makes far more of an impact than somebody going, oh, I haven't done that.
Yeah, I completely agree. In fact, I have a client from a couple of years ago. He was actually, before talking to me, he had actually engaged with a company and a guy who said that he would write a script for him and help him with scripting and training. And my client had told him, that's great. I'm totally happy to pay it. My one condition is I want you to make phone calls and prove that your script works and then train my team based on that. And the guy's like, no, I only write scripts. I don't make phone calls. And literally my client was just like, well, then what's the good in that? I don't want the theoretical, right? I don't want the professor who's never done X, Y, and Z to then teach me the book, knowledge about it. I want to know it in practice. And I think that's a huge point. I mean, I have many times in situations where a company and or the reps have questioned and said, well, what do you know about this? And it's like, let's go. Literally, let's go. I will take calls right here on speakerphone, and I'm going to show you how it's done. That's usually how I finished my training classes before sending them to the nest, is I'd have everyone in my office, and I'd take a live new call on speakerphone with the script in hand, reading the script and showing them what it's done. Like, it's not theoretical. Like, let me show you. Come on, kids, gather around the old fire, and let me show you how it's done. And, close the deal in one call, send it off, and then hang up and be like, there you go. Good luck. Now go do it. Right. And it sets a different tone.
That is everything. That's it. Yeah. That's the pinnacle of what you need to do. Because if you can show them how it's done, you're not just telling them, you're walking them there, you're drinking from the water, you're drinking from the Kool-Aid, and you're saying, hey, that's how it's done. And that will be more of an impact than anything else you could ever say or do in a training class. If you have got that ability to do that, the same way that I look at from a training manager's position. As people have said to me before, training managers don't know how to train, they just know how to manage the trainers. If a training manager can step into a classroom and deliver the product, that's again how it's done. These are the big things that you have to make a difference. And I think you ending on that bombshell is a great way to end. Having everyone, I want to come and listen to those sales calls, Jason. I'm coming over. I'm flying to the US right now. We're doing it. Let's go and do it. I don't know who we're going to phone. I don't know who we're going to sell to, but let's do it.
Let's just do it. Maybe that's what we'll start doing on these calls. Who knows? So awesome stuff. I have, what's exciting about doing these shows with you, Oliver, is that I also have no idea what we're going to talk about next week because we've kind of tore through training. So we'll figure that out. If anyone has any comments, suggestions, ideas, any challenges you're facing, please reach out to us. Jason at Cutter Consulting Group, Oliver at thecatalyst.com with 2 T's. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can join us every Wednesday. Oliver's doing awesome, cool stuff. You want to tell them what you're working on the side that we're just evolving and growing, and we'll wrap it up for today.
Website is currently under design as we speak. So that's happening. So we'll be broadcasting from the website, hopefully in 2 to 3 weeks once that's all done and dusted and branded. All the previous episodes are hopefully going to be loaded into a podcast very, very shortly and dumped on the website as well. Our new dedicated YouTube channel will have all of our episodes upload hopefully by the end of the week. We're just deciding on thumbnail art to what to put on there. I think I've sent Jason like 1 million pictures this week. Going, do you like this? Do you like that? Do you like this? So there's lots of stuff going there. We're pushing social media. We're going to have a load of these clips that we're doing right now. So what you're looking at, these are going to be dumped out there as well. So all of our hot topics and the bombs that we've dropped over the last kind of 6, 7, 8 weeks, we're going to have chopped up and chased into little snippets for you for takeaways. So there's a load of cool stuff happening. And like I say, the episodes are up to you. Where we go next. We talked about onboarding. Now maybe we talk about our speed to competency as we go through that whole introductory process. But look, whatever happens, happens. It's all about call centers. It's all about you and how we help you, right?
Love it. Great way to end it. Oliver, as always, thanks for joining me, being a part of this. Appreciate you very much.
And you, Jason. Look at you, little superstar. Let's rock and roll, hey?
Let's do it. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, watching it live, watching the replay. We will catch you next week, same time. This has been Call Center Confidence with Cutter and Catt. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week.